At 0647, June 6, 1944, Commander Samuel Dealey stood in the cramped, humid conning tower of the USS Harder, his eyes pressed against the periscope shears as he watched the moonlit horizon of the Celebes Sea. Below him, the Harder was a beehive of controlled panic. The air was thick with the scent of diesel, sweat, and the electric ozone of batteries pushed to their limit. For nearly 3 years of war, the tactical manual for American submariners had been written in the ink of caution. If a destroyer finds you, you dive, you run, and you pray. It was a game of cat and mouse where the submarine was always the mouse. A Japanese destroyer like the Minazuki was a 35-knot Predator equipped with enough depth charges to turn the Harder's steel hull into a crumpled soda can. But Dealey, a 37-year-old veteran with 18 kills already etched into his reputation, was tired of running. He looked at his executive officer through the dim red battle lights and did something that defied every law of naval survival. Instead of ordering a crash dive to the safety of the abyss, he ordered flank speed straight at the enemy's teeth. The suicidal mathematics of the Pacific had always dictated that a submerged sub stood zero chance against an active destroyer in a head-on engagement. Dealey was about to tear that page out of the book and burn it. The tension in the control room reached a breaking point as the range to the charging Minazuki dropped from 2,000 yards to 1,100 in what felt like a heartbeat. The sound of the enemy sonar pings, a sharp, metallic ping, 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 echoed through the Harder's hull like a countdown to an execution. Men gripped handholds until their knuckles turned white, staring at the depth gauge that remained stubbornly at periscope depth. They were in the kill zone, a terrifying tactical vacuum where any mistake meant a 30-knot ramming or a direct hit from above. Dealey waited until the massive bow of the destroyer filled the periscope lens, a steel mountain moving at terrifying speed. At 900 yards, he shouted the command that would change submarine warfare forever. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4. 4 torpedoes streaked through the water in a tight spread, a down-the-throat shot that required ice in the veins. But as the torpedoes left the tubes, the unexpected happened. The Harder's diving planes jammed momentarily at a shallow angle. Instead of plunging deep to avoid the coming explosion, the submarine hung precariously just beneath the surface, directly in the path of the flaming wreckage and the destroyer's still churning propellers. In a final heart-stopping twist, as the Minazuki began to erupt in a cataclysmic blast, the Harder wasn't diving away. She was being sucked toward the sinking Predator by the massive vacuum of the ship's dying wake. By early June 1944, the waters surrounding the Tawi-Tawi anchorage had become the most dangerous square miles on the planet for an American submariner. Known to the crew of the USS Harder as the Dragon's Nest, this remote corner of the Sulu archipelago was the staging ground for Admiral Soemu Toyoda's desperate counteroffensive, Operation A-Go. As Commander Samuel Dealey peered through the periscope, he didn't just see a coastline, he saw the concentrated fury of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Looming in the distance were the massive superstructures of the battleships Yamato and Musashi, surrounded by a forest of masts belonging to 9 carriers and scores of heavy cruisers. This was the largest concentration of Japanese naval power since Midway, and the Harder was sitting right in its throat. The air in the submarine had turned foul, a stagnant mix of recycled oxygen and the sharp metallic scent of high-voltage batteries as Dealey pushed the boat deeper into the screening perimeter. Every man on board knew that a single mistake, a stray bubble, a momentary glint of sunlight on the periscope lens, or a noisy pump would bring 30 destroyers screaming down on their position. Dealey's calm was unnatural.
He moved through the control room like a ghost, his mind calculating the intricate dance of the Japanese patrol patterns. He wasn't there to observe, he was there to bait the dragon out of its lair, knowing that the success of the entire Pacific invasion fleet depended on him causing enough chaos to force the Japanese to move before they were ready. The tension escalated to a fever pitch on the night of June 6th when the Harder was nearly betrayed by the very element she relied on, the sea itself. While attempting to clear the Sibutu Passage, a Japanese patrol plane equipped with primitive but effective magnetic anomaly detectors caught a faint ripple in the moonlit water, the Harder's periscope wake. Within minutes, the silent night was shattered by the rhythmic, bone-shaking thrum of high-speed propellers. 3 destroyers, led by the Minizuki, broke formation and began a pincer movement to trap the American intruder against the treacherous reefs of Borneo. Dealey watched as the signal lamps of the enemy ships flickered across the dark water, coordinating their kill. In the cramped conning tower, the sound operator, sweating profusely, reported that the Japanese sonar was no longer searching. They had a hard ping on the Harder's hull. The submarine was boxed in, with the jagged coral of the reef only hundreds of yards to the west, and 3 steel killers closing from the east. Just as Dealey prepared to dive for a desperate escape, a 4th radar contact appeared on the screen, coming from the heart of the anchorage. It wasn't another destroyer. It was a heavy cruiser, moving at flank speed directly toward the Harder's last known position. But the twist wasn't the arrival of more firepower. It was that the Japanese ships, in their bloodlust to kill the submarine, had failed to coordinate their own lanes, and the Harder now sat in a direct collision path between the charging destroyers and their own heavy cruiser, setting the stage for a catastrophic friendly fire disaster that Dealey was determined to exploit.
The tactical nightmare inside the Sibutu Passage reached its breaking point as the destroyer Minazuki broke away from the confusion of the Japanese pincer movement, refocusing its lethal intent solely on the USS Harder. In the conning tower, the heat was a physical weight, thick with the smell of hydraulic fluid and the ragged breathing of men who knew they were seconds away from being crushed by the sea. Commander Samuel Dealey watched the Minazuki through the periscope. The ship was no longer a distant silhouette, but a towering wall of gray steel, its bow cutting the Pacific swells like a jagged knife. The Japanese captain, realizing the submarine was refusing to dive, increased speed to 30 knots, intending to ram the Harder and end the terror of Tawi-Tawi once and for all. Dealey's voice remained a hauntingly calm monotone, calling out ranges that felt like a death count. 1,500 yards, 1,200, 1,000. To his crew, it felt like suicide. The down-the-throat shot was a gamble against physics. If the torpedoes failed to detonate, or the destroyer's shallow draft allowed them to pass underneath, the Harder would be sliced in half before she could even begin to submerge. Dealey didn't flinch, even as the sound of the Minazuki's roaring engines began to vibrate through the submarine's own hull, a low, terrifying growl that drowned out the frantic pings of the sonar. At exactly 900 yards, the point of no return, Dealey gave the order that would immortalize him in naval history. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3. 3 Mark 14 torpedoes surged from the bow tubes, their wake invisible in the churning white foam of the charging destroyer. "Emergency deep, blow all vents," Dealey barked, and the Harder tilted forward at a staggering 30-degree angle, her deck plates groaning as she fought to claw her way beneath the surface. For 40 agonizing seconds, the submarine was suspended in a void of silence, every man braced for the impact of a depth charge or the grinding crunch of a hull-to-hull collision. Then, a massive double-thud explosion rocked the Harder so violently that men were thrown from their stations and light bulbs shattered into glass rain.
The Minazuki hadn't just been hit, it had been eviscerated. The torpedoes had struck the forward magazine, and the destroyer's own momentum acted as its executioner, driving the broken hull into the sea at full speed. But as the Harder leveled off at 300 feet, the victory turned terrifying. The sinking wreckage of the Minazuki, still propelled by its dying engines, plunged through the water directly on top of the submarine. The Harder was struck not by a weapon, but by the falling corpse of her enemy, the metal-on-metal screech echoing through the hull as the destroyer's twisted keel dragged across the Harder's upper deck, nearly pinning her to the ocean floor in a final spectral embrace.
By 02:30 on June 7th, the USS Harder was a ghost ship gliding through the liquid abyss of pitch-black ink. The moon was strangled by heavy tropical clouds, and the air on the bridge was thick with the electric hum of the radar mast and the salt spray of the Celebes Sea. Commander Samuel Dealey stood on the cigarette deck, his lungs finally tasting fresh air after the claustrophobic nightmare of the previous day's battle. The submarine was running on the surface to recharge her depleted batteries, her 4 massive diesel engines roaring with a rhythmic power that felt dangerously loud in the oppressive silence. Suddenly, the radar operator's voice crackled through the intercom, sharp and urgent. Radar contact, single ship, bearing 095, range 8,000 yards, closing fast. It was the Hayanami, a 2,100-ton Yugumo-class destroyer, commanded by Hideo Kuboki. Kuboki was a veteran, but he was exhausted, his crew's nerves frayed by 48 hours of chasing a phantom that refused to die. He believed no American submarine would dare remain on the surface so close to the Tawi-Tawi anchorage. Dealey, sensing the enemy's complacency, didn't submerge. Instead, he ordered flank speed, pushing the Harder to 21 knots in a daring surface-to-surface charge. He was betting everything on radar invisibility, the hope that the Harder's low silhouette would remain lost in the sea clutter until it was too late for the Japanese to react. The range collapsed with terrifying speed. 5,000 yards, 4,000, 3,000. On the Hayanami, the radar operator finally screamed a warning, but the transition from a routine patrol to a fight for survival was too jarring for the Japanese bridge crew. Kuboki ordered an immediate turn to ram, but the Harder was already inside his turning circle. At 2,300 yards, an incredibly long shot for a night surface engagement, Dealey felt the submarine shudder as 4 torpedoes leapt from the bow tubes. "Take her down, emergency dive," he shouted as the last torpedo cleared. As the Harder slid beneath the black swells, 2 massive explosions tore through the night, so powerful they were visible through the periscope even as it submerged. The Hayanami didn't just sink, she disintegrated. The torpedoes had struck near the aft magazine, shearing the entire stern off the ship. The bow stood vertically in the water for a few horrific seconds, its propellers still spinning fruitlessly in the air before the Pacific swallowed it whole. But the twist came as the Harder reached 150 feet, the sound of the Hayanami's depth charges detonating after the ship had already sunk. In a final act of mechanical vengeance, the sinking destroyer's depth charges, triggered by the increasing water pressure as the wreck plummeted, began exploding in a perfect pattern around the Harder, effectively depth charging the submarine from the grave of the very ship she had just destroyed. On the afternoon of June 8th, the USS Harder prowled the southern entrance of the Sabutu Passage, a narrow, treacherous artery between Tawi-Tawi and Borneo. Commander Samuel Dealey was now operating in a state of hyper-focus, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, but his tactical mind sharper than ever. The Japanese had flooded the strait with anti-submarine groups, but their desperation had made them predictable. At 1400,
The lookout spotted the silhouettes of two more destroyers, the Tawi-Tawi and an unidentified escort, zigzagging at 25 knots. Dealey didn't retreat. He maneuvered the Harder directly into their path, choosing to stay at periscope depth, despite the dangerously clear water that made the submarine's shadow visible from the air. He tracked the Tawi-Tawi for 90 minutes, timing her course changes with a stopwatch. The air in the boat was a suffocating 100 degrees, and the crew worked in a silence so profound that the only sound was the distant, rhythmic thrum-thrum of the enemy's twin propellers. Dealey waited until the Tawi-Tawi made her final turn, bringing her bow on at a range of 1,200 yards. It was another down-the-throat setup, but this time the enemy was hunting him specifically. At 16:30, Dealey loosed a spread of 4 torpedoes at 17-second intervals. The first missed, but the second and third tore into the Tawi-Tawi near the bridge and the forward magazine. The resulting cataclysm was so massive that the Harder, submerged at 80 feet, was lifted and shaken like a toy by the underwater shockwave. The crew heard the hull plates groan as the destroyer literally disintegrated above them. The Tawi-Tawi vanished in less than 3 minutes, but the victory was immediately followed by a terrifying realization. The escort destroyer, seeing the oil and debris, didn't just drop depth charges, it began a creeping attack, a high-precision hunt, where it sat silently, listening for the Harder's electric motors. Dealey took the boat to an unprecedented 400 feet, far below her tested safety limit. As the hull groaned under the crushing pressure, a terrifying twist occurred. The Harder's internal trim pump failed, causing the submarine to start sinking uncontrollably towards the crush depth of the abyss. While the Japanese escort dropped 42 depth charges overhead, the crew had to manually move heavy cases of canned food and spare parts from the stern to the bow just to balance the ship and stop her fatal plunge into the darkness. On the morning of June 9th, 12 miles southwest of Tawi-Tawi, Commander Samuel Dealey peered through the periscope and beheld a sight that would have paralyzed a lesser man. 4 Japanese destroyers were steaming in a line of breast formation, their sonar pings hammering against the USS Harder's hull with such intensity that the sound operator could hear them without his headphones. This wasn't a random encounter. It was a deliberate sweep designed to find and crush the submarine that had turned the anchorage into a graveyard. The air inside the Harder was a toxic soup of carbon dioxide and fear, yet Dealey remained an island of terrifying calm. He only had 8 torpedoes left. At 0612, the second destroyer in the line made a fatal turn, bringing its broadside into Dealey's crosshairs at 1,800 yards. Without a second's hesitation, he loosed a 3-torpedo spread. The ocean erupted in a spectacular triple column of fire and debris that climbed 300 feet into the air. The ship rolled over and vanished in just 90 seconds, leaving nothing but a smoking oil slick and the screams of survivors. Dealey had just sunk his 4th destroyer in 4 days, but the victory had stirred a hornet's nest. The remaining 3 destroyers immediately converged, their prows cutting the water like scythes as they prepared to rain fire on the Harder's last known position. The ensuing depth charge barrage was the most violent in the Harder's history. 23 charges detonated in the first 10 minutes alone, shattering light fixtures and springing leaks in the forward torpedo room. As Dealey took the boat to 500 feet, the pressure hull groaned and the lights flickered out, leaving the crew in a terrifying red-lit darkness. But the true twist of June 9th was not tactical. It was strategic.
High above, at the Tawi-Tawi headquarters, Admiral Ozawa watched the reports of the fourth lost destroyer with growing horror. He concluded that the anchorage was no longer a safe haven, but a death trap. Fearing his entire mobile fleet was vulnerable to this invisible predator, Ozawa made the fateful decision to depart Tawi-Tawi 6 days earlier than planned. This premature move meant the Japanese carriers would arrive at the Battle of the Philippine Sea without proper reconnaissance or coordinated land-based air support. By sinking those 4 destroyers, Dealey had unwittingly dismantled the foundation of Operation A-Go. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, which would later break the back of Japanese naval aviation, was effectively won not in the air, but in the dark, pressurized silence of the Harder's conning tower, where one man's aggression had forced the entire Imperial Fleet into a disorganized retreat.
In August 1944, the USS Harder departed the calm docks of Fremantle for her 6th war patrol, carrying a legacy that made her the most feared predator in the Pacific. Commander Samuel Dealey, now a living legend decorated with the Navy Cross, led a wolf pack consisting of the Haddo and the Hake. Their mission was to strangle Japanese shipping routes off the coast of Luzon, Philippines. The atmosphere aboard the Harder had shifted. The raw adrenaline of the June patrols had been replaced by a grim professional intensity. Dealey had trained his new crewmen in the down-the-throat tactics that had revolutionized submarine warfare, but the Japanese had also been learning. On August 21st and 22nd, the Wolfpack demonstrated its lethal efficiency, tearing through a 16-ship convoy and sinking several vessels, including 2 frigates, Matsuwa and Hiburi. As the Harder patrolled the waters off Daesal Bay, the crew felt invincible, unaware that the Imperial Japanese Navy had finally mobilized a specialized hunter-killer group specifically designed to find and erase the destroyer killer. The hunters had now become the hunted as Japanese intelligence intercepted the Wolfpack's radio transmissions, narrowing the search area to the very waters where Dealey was preparing his next strike. The dawn of August 24, 1944, brought a haunting silence to the western coast of Luzon. The USS Hake, submerged 4 miles to the south, watched through its periscope as the Harder remained on the surface, silhouetted against the morning light. Both submarines were closing in on a crippled Japanese destroyer, unaware that 2 escort vessels, CD-22 and minesweeper PB-102, were already closing the trap at 18 knots. The Hake sonar operator froze as the metallic ping of Japanese echo ranging grew deafeningly loud. At 05:30, the Harder finally spotted the danger and executed a desperate crash dive. The submarine tilted at a sharp 35-degree angle, her diesel engines still roaring as she breached the surface for the last time. In a terrifying twist of fate, the very aggression that had saved the Harder in the past now betrayed her. The speed of her dive left a massive, churning bubble trail on the surface, a perfect bullseye for the CD-22. As Dealey fought to take the boat deep, the Japanese escort moved directly into the bubble wake, its crew looking down at the dark shape of the submarine, visible through the clear tropical water. The trap was sprung, and for the first time in 5 patrols, Samuel Dealey was out of time. The end came with a violence that the Pacific had rarely witnessed. At 05:47, the CD-22 passed directly over the USS Harder's desperate bubble trail and unleashed a full pattern of depth charges, set to detonate at the precise depth of 250 feet. The explosions were perfectly bracketed, hammering the submarine's hull with the force of 1,000 sledgehammers. Inside the Harder, the world turned into a cacophony of screaming metal and shattering glass. A massive rupture near the after torpedo room sent a jet of seawater into the hull at such immense pressure that it cut through steel and flesh like a laser. As the stern flooded, the submarine's bow rose sharply, a final, futile gesture toward the surface she would never reach again. Commander Samuel Dealey's last order to blow all ballast was silenced by a second, even more devastating barrage that buckled the main pressure hull. The Harder plummeted into the dark, cold depths of Dassel Bay, imploding as she passed 600 feet. In less than 3 minutes, the destroyer killer and her 79-man crew were gone, leaving only a rising plume of oil, cork insulation, and wooden debris to mark their grave. The USS Hake, watching helplessly from a distance, recorded the silence that followed, a silence that signaled the loss of the most aggressive tactical mind in the submarine force. For 80 years, the Harder remained a ghost of the deep, her story told only through yellowing patrol reports and the Medal of Honor posthumously awarded to Dealey. But in May 2024, the Lost 52 project finally bridged the gap between history and the present. Using advanced side-scan sonar, an exploration team located the wreck sitting upright on the seafloor at a depth of 3,750 feet, 12 miles west of Dassel Bay. The images revealed a haunting sight. The submarine is remarkably intact, her conning tower still standing tall, though scarred by the depth charge damage that claimed her. The discovery provided a final, chilling twist to the legend. The Harder was found sitting in a defiant, level position, as if she were still on patrol, waiting for an enemy that had long since vanished. Today, Samuel Dealey lies in Arlington National Cemetery, but his true monument is the silent hull at the bottom of the South China Sea. His legacy redefined naval warfare, proving that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something else, the survival of a fleet, the protection of a nation, is more important than the math of one's own survival.